Let's begin our journey into Latin American literature, one of the most vibrant and imaginative literary traditions in the world. If you've ever wondered how stories can blend everyday life with the unbelievable, or how writers use fiction to respond to political struggles, this chapter will give you a fascinating window into that world. Latin America has a unique history, shaped by colonization, revolutions, indigenous cultures, and migration. Because of this, the literature that emerges from the region feels rich, emotional, layered, and deeply human. You'll often find myth sitting beside modern life, or political oppression expressed through magical and symbolic storytelling. In fact, the region is famous for magical realism, a genre that mixes the real and the extraordinary so naturally that the supernatural feels perfectly normal. This genre has been mentioned in exam, so keep it in mind as a key feature of Latin American writing. In this chapter, we'll walk through the voices that shaped this tradition. Imagine moving from the philosophical puzzles of Jorge Luis Borges to the passionate, revolutionary poetry of Pablo Neruda, to the haunting family histories of Isabel Allende, and finally to the dreamlike universe of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Marquez's novel 100 Years of Solitude became the defining work of what we call the Latin American boom, a moment when writers from the region suddenly gained worldwide attention. But the story doesn't stop there. Writers like Clarice Lispector, Mario Vargas Llosa, and Octavio Paz pushed boundaries by playing with form and philosophy, while Edwidge Danticat, Junot Diaz, and Alejo Carpentier expanded Latin American writing through their diasporic and Afro-Caribbean experiences. Their works explore themes like identity, memory, trauma, cultural mixing, and resistance. These themes help us understand how literature reflects the struggles and dreams of the people who create it. One beautiful idea that appears again and again in Latin American writing is the comparison between plant growth and human life. Writers often use natural imagery to describe cultural history and movement. This analogy, too, has been asked in exam. A great example is found in the stories of Zul Poot, who describes the geography of the Chilambalam towns so vividly that the landscapes almost become characters themselves. That focus on place has also been tested in exam. Another important feature is the widespread presence of Quechua, an indigenous language spoken across several countries. Its influence on the region's literature has been highlighted in exam as well. So pause here and take note of how indigenous languages shape storytelling. Now let's move to Argentina, one of the key centers of Latin American writing. We begin with Jorge Luis Borges, born in 1899, whose life and work have been asked in exam. Borges is often described as the architect of literary labyrinths, a writer who creates infinite worlds out of philosophical questions. His career started with poems celebrating Buenos Aires, but a major shift happened after a near-fatal accident in 1938. That event opened a flood of creativity that led to masterpieces like Ficciones and El Aleph. In these works, Borges plays with time, mirrors, dreams, and impossible libraries. In fact, his famous story, The Library of Babel, begins with an epigraph taken from Robert Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy, and this epigraph has been mentioned in exam. The story explores the overwhelming burden of searching for meaning in a universe filled with infinite books. Borges also wrote detective fiction with Adolfo Bioy Casares, experimented with allegory, and explored metaphysical puzzles. Ironically, as he rose to greatness, he became completely blind, yet that never slowed him down. He dictated his later works, served as director of the National Library, and taught literature at the University of Buenos Aires. His legacy reshaped not just Latin American writing, but world literature. Next, we meet Julio Cortázar, born in 1914. He was a master of experimental fiction, someone who refused to follow traditional storytelling rules. His novel Hopscotch allows you to read its chapters in different sequences, almost like choosing your own path through the book. This playful spirit appears in his short stories too, where the everyday suddenly becomes strange, mysterious, and dreamlike. Cortázar was a major figure of the Latin American boom, using surrealism, fragmentation, and philosophical ideas to push fiction into new territories. Together, writers like Borges and Cortázar transformed Argentina into a powerhouse of literary innovation. Their work reminds us that Latin American literature is not just about magic or politics, but also about questioning reality, challenging traditions, and exploring what it means to be human. Let's take a walk through some of the most influential voices from Latin America, starting with Brazil and moving toward the wider continent. These writers shaped modern literature with their bold themes, unique styles, and deep cultural roots. As we go along, I'll point out a few details that have appeared in exam, so pause and note them whenever needed. Let's begin with Jorge Amado, born in 1912, a writer who captured the colors, sounds, and spirit of Bahia, a coastal region in Brazil known for its Afro-Brazilian traditions. Amado remains one of the most widely translated Brazilian novelists because his stories feel alive, full of music, laughter, food, folklore, and human warmth. You'll often hear students talk about his famous novel Gabriela, Clove and Cinnamon, published in 1958, and that date has been asked in exam. Another beloved novel is Dona Flor and Her Two Husbands from 1966, where he mixes romance with humor and even a touch of the supernatural. A lovely thing about Amado's writing is how he brings everyday working-class characters to the center. His early works show his Marxist leanings, while his later fiction opens the door to magical realism and playful satire. Through all these phases, he celebrates the cultural richness of Bahia, its religions, its oral traditions, its racial diversity, and its festive energy. Because of this, Amado became a key figure in post-colonial and regionalist writing, helping readers across the world understand Brazil not through textbooks but through storytelling. Now let's shift to a totally different kind of writer. Clarice Lispector, born in 1920. Though she was born in Ukraine, she grew up in Brazil and became one of the most original voices in Portuguese language literature. If Amado wrote about crowded streets and noisy marketplaces, Lispector takes us inward, right into the mind and soul. Her writing is introspective, philosophical, emotionally delicate, and sometimes deliberately challenging. Many readers compare her work to Virginia Woolf or Franz Kafka because she explores consciousness more than action. Her novels such as The Passion According to G.H., published in 1964, and The Hour of the Star from 1977, focus on women dealing with alienation, identity, and the search for meaning. The plots are often minimal. Instead, she explores the subtle movements of thought: silence, uncertainty, hesitation, and revelation. Her unique style makes her a precursor to feminist writing in Latin America, long before it became a major critical movement. Moving beyond Brazil, we arrive at one of the most celebrated poets of the 20th century, Pablo Neruda, born in 1904. His name has been asked in exam, so remember it. Neruda wasn't just a poet, he was also a diplomat and even a senator, and his writing blends personal emotions with political commitment. He gained early fame with 20 love poems and A Song of Despair, published in 1924, and this title has appeared in exam. Remarkably, he wrote it when he was just 19. These poems overflow with passion, longing, and lush imagery, the kind that made him instantly recognizable as a powerful new voice. His masterpiece, however, is Canto General, released in 1950. This epic work has been asked in exam too. Imagine more than 15,000 lines divided across over 200 poems, all retelling the story of Latin America, from ancient indigenous civilizations to colonial violence and revolutionary awakening. Neruda creates a sweeping, mythic map of the continent, blending history, politics, and poetry with deep emotion and fierce commitment. In 1971, Neruda received the Nobel Prize for Literature, a recognition of his lifelong achievement. Across his career, his writing moves between two extremes: intimate love poetry, and bold political vision. Together, they show us that poetry can be both personal and public, both tender and revolutionary. Let me summarize a few titles you should keep in mind, especially for exam revision. 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair from 1924 has come in exam. Tentativa del Hombre Infinito, published in 1926, has also been noted in exam. El Habitante y su Esperanza from the same year has been tested in exam as well. España en el Corazón, written in 1937 during the Spanish Civil War, appears in exam questions. Canto General from 1950 remains one of the most important epics in world literature and has been asked in exam. Cien Sonetos de Amor, or 100 Love Sonnets, published in 1959, is another favorite of examiners. These works span love, war, political struggle, personal reflection, and sweeping historical narrative, showing just how versatile Neruda really was. Let's take a quick look at Isabel Allende, one of the most powerful storytelling voices from Latin America. Born in 1942 in Lima and raised in Chile, she writes stories that blend memory, politics, and a touch of magic. Her breakthrough novel, The House of the Spirits, came out in 1982, and that year has been asked in exam. The book follows 4 generations of the Truba family and mirrors real Chilean history, including echoes of Salvador Allende, the Pinochet dictatorship, and even a character who reminds readers of Pablo Neruda. Allende mixes family drama with magical realism, using dreams, visions, and supernatural moments to explore how personal lives are shaped by political upheaval. Her next major novel, Of Love and Shadows, published in 1984, has appeared in exam as well. This story moves directly into the dark years of military repression, following a journalist and a photographer whose love slowly becomes a form of resistance. Later, she shifted toward young readers with City of the Beasts, released in 2002, another title mentioned in exam. This novel takes us deep into the Amazon and blends environmental themes with mythic elements. Across all her writing, Allende returns to a few central ideas: exile, memory, injustice, and the healing power of storytelling. Whether she's describing political violence or magical visions, her stories remind us how personal and national histories are always connected. Let's step into the enchanting world of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, one of the most influential writers of the 20th century and the voice who shaped what we now call magical realism. Garcia Marquez was a Colombian novelist, and this fact has appeared in exam, so keep it in mind. He was born in the small town of Aracataca in 1927, a place whose atmosphere, myths, and stories formed the foundation for much of his later fiction. He rose to global fame during the Latin American boom, that exciting period when writers from Latin America suddenly captured the world's attention. In 1982, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature, and this award has been asked in exam. Interestingly, he was the 4th Latin American to win the Nobel, following Mistral, Asturias, and Neruda. When Garcia Marquez delivered his Nobel Prize speech, he began by invoking Ferdinand Magellan and Antonio Pigafetta, the early explorers whose chronicles described astonishing wonders of the New World. This reference has been tested in exam. He used their stories to show that Latin America has always been a place where unusual realities demand equally unusual storytelling. His years as a journalist shaped his writing, making it sharp, vivid, and grounded even when it wandered into magic. His most celebrated novel, 100 Years of Solitude, published in 1967, is often considered his masterpiece, and both the title and the publication year have been asked in exam. The novel follows 7 generations of the Buendia family in the fictional town of Macondo, a place that feels both mythic and strangely familiar. It begins with one of the most unforgettable opening lines in modern fiction, when Colonel Aureliano Buendia remembers the afternoon his father showed him ice. One of the most intriguing characters in the novel is Melquiades, a gypsy traveler and a prophetic figure. His role has been mentioned in exam. He becomes a symbol of knowledge, mystery, and memory, eventually revealed as the one who has written the very manuscript the reader is decoding. Critics often connect this metafictional twist to the influence of Jorge Luis Borges, while the novel's sprawling family structure reflects the impact of William Faulkner. Another major work is Love in the Time of Cholera, published in 1985, and this title has also appeared in exam. Here, Garcia Marquez shifts from mythic history to the intimate world of long, enduring love. The novel follows the complicated relationship between Florentino Ariza and Fermina Daza, whose names have been tested in exam. Their story stretches across more than half a century and explores themes like aging, obsession, and the strange balance between romance and decay. As always, Garcia Marquez blends memory with imagination so seamlessly that the line between real life and fiction almost dissolves. Whether he writes about solitude, revolution, love, or political power, Garcia Marquez's great strength lies in his ability to capture the collective memory of Latin America. His stories feel like myths passed down through generations and yet remain deeply human and relatable. Before we wrap up, let's quickly highlight some of his major works. His novels include In Evil Hour, 100 Years of Solitude, The Autumn of the Patriarch, Love in the Time of Cholera, The General in His Labyrinth of Love and Other Demons, and even the posthumous Until August, released in 2024. His novellas range from Leaf Storm to No One Writes to the Colonel, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, and Memories of My Melancholy Horse. And among his short stories, students often remember The Handsomest Drowned Man in the World, A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, and The Incredible and Sad Tale of Innocent Erendira. Across all these works, Garcia Marquez blends the magical with the ordinary, the political with the personal, and the historical with the mythical. That combination made him not just a writer, but a storyteller whose voice continues to echo across the world. Let's take a short journey into modern Mexican literature and meet three writers who changed the way the world understands Mexico: Octavio Paz, Carlos Fuentes, and Juan Rulfo. Each of them explored history, memory, identity, and the soul of the nation, but they did so in very different ways. We'll begin with Octavio Paz, one of the most celebrated Mexican thinkers of the 20th century. Paz was a poet, an essayist, and a diplomat, and his life beautifully blended political experience with deep philosophical reflection. He received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1990, and this honor has been asked in exam, so do keep it in mind. He also won major international awards like the Jerusalem Prize, the Miguel de Cervantes Prize, and the Neustadt Prize. What makes Paz fascinating is the way his work connects poetry with history and psychology. His most important prose book is The Labyrinth of Solitude, published in 1950, and that publication year has been asked in exam as well. This book is a collection of essays that tries to understand the Mexican identity, how history, colonization, and culture come together to shape the emotional life of the nation. Paz believed that Mexico carries a mixture of indigenous and Spanish influences, and this mixture sometimes creates a feeling of loneliness or inner conflict. He says that people often wear metaphorical masks, ways of hiding their true feelings or vulnerabilities. One of the famous chapters is The Pachuco and Other Extremes, and another is The Dialectic of Solitude, both of which have been mentioned in exam. Throughout the book, Paz returns to the idea that solitude is not just a social condition but a deep existential feeling. He beautifully writes that human beings are always nostalgic and searching for communion, meaning we long for connection even when we feel most alone. The book also talks about how Mexicans relate to death, celebration, and masculinity. Even festivals, Paz says, are sometimes ways of escaping loneliness. One of the powerful symbols he discusses is La Malinche, a historical figure connected to betrayal and colonial trauma. Through her, he explains how the past continues to influence modern identity. Paz's insights were so significant that Harold Bloom later included The Labyrinth of Solitude in the Western canon. Now, let's move to Carlos Fuentes, one of the giants of the Latin American boom. Fuentes had a deep interest in how history shapes the present, and he wrote fiction that mixed politics, memory, myth, and philosophical reflection. His landmark novel, The Death of Artemio Cruz, written in 1962, tells the story of a dying man remembering his life. The novel uses shifting perspectives and stream of consciousness writing to show how the hopes of the Mexican Revolution slowly turned into corruption and disappointment. Fuentes also wrote a mysterious and haunting novella called Aura, which uses second-person narration, the you form, to draw the reader directly into the story. His works combine myth, time, desire, and identity, making him one of Mexico's most imaginative and intellectually rich authors. Our third writer, Juan Rulfo, produced only a small number of works, but his influence is enormous. Rulfo wrote with a quiet, haunting intensity, capturing the loneliness of rural Mexico. His novel, Pedro Paramo, published in 1955, is set in a ghost town where the living and the dead speak side by side. His short story collection, The Burning Plain, also explores empty landscapes, silence, and the weight of memory. Rulfo's writing is known for being extremely economical. He uses very few words, but every word carries emotional force. Because of his atmospheric style and his blending of the real with the supernatural, Rulfo is often seen as a precursor to magical realism. Writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez openly said that Rulfo's influence shaped their own work. Together, Paz, Fuentes, and Rulfo give us three different windows into Mexico. Paz questions the inner self and the weight of history. Fuentes examines power, myth, and political change. Rulfo listens to the silences of the countryside and the ghosts of the past. Through their voices, we understand that Mexican literature is not only rich and poetic, but also deeply philosophical. It asks where we come from, what identities we inherit, and how memory shapes our present. Let's start in Peru with Mario Vargas Llosa, born in 1936. He's one of the leading figures of the Latin American boom, and in 2010 he even received the Nobel Prize in Literature. His writing is bold, political, and deeply rooted in the social realities of his country. His very first novel, The Time of the Hero, came out in 1963 and caused a huge stir. Why? Because it exposed corruption and violence inside a military academy very similar to the one he himself attended. People weren't happy, but the book made him instantly famous. Another major work, Conversation in the Cathedral, published in 1969, uses experimental narrative techniques to explore the oppressive regime of Manuel Odría. The personal and the political blend together, creating a portrait of disillusionment and power. One of his later and most celebrated novels, The Feast of the Goat, came out in 2000, and this title has been asked in exam. It reconstructs the final days of the Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo, showing how tyranny damages not just a society, but the minds and emotions of people living under it. Vargas Llosa is known for his complex structures, shifting perspectives, and moral depth. As both a novelist and a public intellectual, he constantly pushes readers to question power, history, and the responsibility literature carries in confronting injustice. Now let's move to Cuba, beginning with José Martí, a towering figure in Cuban culture. Martí was more than a poet. He was a revolutionary thinker, a journalist, and a passionate advocate for Cuban independence. His most beloved collection, Versos Sencillos, published in 1891, is full of simple yet powerful poems. You might even know Yo soy un hombre sincero, which later became the famous song Guantanamera. Martí wrote beautifully in both Spanish and English, always defending freedom, education, and the unity of Latin America. He warned against colonialism, whether from Spain or the rising influence of the United States. Sadly, he died young in 1895 during the struggle for Cuba's liberation, but his ideas continue to shape Latin American identity and thought. From Cuba, we meet another major writer, Alejo Carpentier, born in 1904. Carpentier was fascinated by the richness of Caribbean culture, and he blended history, myth, music, and magic in ways few writers had done before. He introduced the idea of lo real maravilloso, or the marvelous real. This idea suggests that Latin America doesn't need imported surrealism. Its own history and culture are already incredible, strange, and magical enough. In The Kingdom of This World, published in 1949, he retells the story of the Haitian Revolution, mixing myth with history. And in The Lost Steps, a 1953 novel, he follows a musician who travels into the South American jungle, searching for the origins of civilization. Carpentier's prose is rich, layered, and deeply tied to the rhythms of the Caribbean. Now let's travel to the Dominican Republic, where we meet Junot Diaz, born in 1968 and later raised in the United States. Diaz writes about immigrant life, masculinity, and trauma using a mix of English, Spanish, and Spanglish. His style is energetic and full of cultural references from comic books to science fiction to Dominican history. His most famous novel, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, won the Pulitzer Prize in 2007. The novel ties personal struggles to the larger history of the Trujillo dictatorship, showing how political violence can echo across generations. Diaz uses humor, heartbreak, footnotes, and shifting voices to tell stories that feel raw, real, and unforgettable. Characters like Junior, who appears in many of his works, serve as semi-autobiographical guides through the Dominican American experience. Finally, we arrive in Haiti with Edwidge Danticat, born in 1969. She moved to the United States as a child, and much of her writing explores the emotional world of migration, what it means to leave home, remember home, and rebuild identity in a new place. Her first novel, Breath, Eyes, Memory, published in 1994, tells the story of a young girl sent from Haiti to New York. It explores family expectations, cultural traditions, and the struggles of growing up between two worlds. Another powerful book, The Dew Breaker, from 2004, deals with the lingering shadows of state violence from the Duvalier era in Haiti. Through linked stories, Danticat shows how trauma can follow people even after they escape their country. Her writing is gentle but strong, full of empathy for voices that are often silenced, especially women shaped by memory, resilience, and untold histories. She blends folklore, oral storytelling, and the pain of political upheaval to create narratives that are both intimate and universally moving.